Chapter 971, Restraint. On the observation deck of the liner, the bugle was sounded. It tore through the obstacles put up by the wind and rain, awakening all the passengers on board. Unable to dress up in time, they could only don a coat or their pajamas, rushing barefoot to the window to observe the situation outside. Half of the passengers quickly saw a gigantic sailboat that didn't adhere to common sense. They saw its 3 pitch-black sails and the blob of pale, flickering yellow amidst the dark environment. Together with the howling winds, spattering rain, and the moonless and starless night sky, many passengers felt as though the ship was approaching them from hell, bringing with it an inexplicable sense of horror and dominance. After a brief pause and frenzy, a name surfaced in their minds: Black Emperor. Anyone who had been out at sea for some time, or people who lived in port cities in the various colonies, more or less knew the existence of such a pirate ship. Sigh, may the storm be with you and me. May the goddess watch over us, holy Lord of storms. As the passengers subconsciously made prayers, they were filled with horror and helplessness. These passengers knew very well that the owner of the Black Emperor had the highest bounty on the 5 seas. In a particular sense, he was the king of pirates, and was a powerful figure who could remain alive despite the campaigns of the various fleets from different nations. He was definitely not someone the cannons and crew of a liner could resist. This meant that they were about to fall into the hands of pirates. Many women couldn't help but imagine being raped by the pirates and being sold to unfamiliar lands. Some trembled while others collapsed to the ground. Some rummaged for daggers or revolvers. It was unknown if they wanted to resist, or if they were unwilling to face the worst outcome. Having failed to find weapons, some moved a clothes rack to their side. The men didn't react any better. Apart from a number of them drawing weapons in a bid to organize themselves to resist, the remaining froze in a daze or sought places to hide. Others cursed the darn liner and the king of the 5 seas. Finally, the captain's voice boomed into the ears of every passenger via the broadcasting equipment or something else.
Silence! Don't be afraid. The owner of the Black Emperor has his own code. He's not like other pirates. His subordinates can only plunder for items and wealth, nothing else.
Such words were repeated a few times as the panicking passengers finally calmed down and no longer exhibited such horror. Compared to the outcomes they had imagined, being able to live and not be raped was an excellent outcome. Almost a minute late, a number of passengers were overwhelmed with sadness and cried upon realizing how their hard-earned savings would be wiped out. Some of them were doing business through loans. If they were unable to pay their loans, it was possible that their family would end up on the streets, relying on the workhouses for survival. Upon having this thought, they hurriedly took action and hid their wealth in all kinds of hidden compartments, hoping to keep as much as they could from the pirates. After doing this, they held their weapons tight, prepared to fight the pirates to the death at critical moments. Even feral beasts would fight back when cornered. Why not humans? At this moment, many of the pirates on the Black Emperor were waiting by the broadside according to their orders. They were prepared to jump onto the prey once the distance was closed. Their second mate, Horror Viscount Bird Mustang, was holding a telescope as he observed the liner opposite him without much thought. He was inwardly calculating how much longer before the 2 ships met. This pirate, whose bounty had exceeded 10,000 pounds, wore an Intis-styled shirt with complicated patterns on his sleeves and collars. He donned a dark red captain's attire, as though he was awaiting the commencement of a ball and not a pirate attack. Suddenly, his vision blurred and he could no longer see the liner. Bird Mustang hurriedly searched with his telescope, but regardless of the direction he aimed it at, there was nothing but stormy waves and red-headed sea eagles who enjoyed hunting fish during storms. Such a huge liner had vanished. The light in Bird Mustang's eyes flickered as he failed to make an accurate judgment.
Where's the ship? Where did such a huge ship go? It was still around.
The pirates on deck also noticed something amiss as they exclaimed, "Chalas! A ghost ship." No, there aren't any ghost ships with such a make. This is a steam and sail hybrid that got popular in recent decades. An illusion. Someone had hidden a liner with a large-scale illusion. An illusion at this scale has to have been done by a demigod. Bird Mustang's thoughts raced as he retracted his telescope and headed for the cabin. During this process, the distance he traveled seemed to distort. In about 8 steps, Bird Mustang covered quite a sizable distance and arrived in front of the captain's cabin. He reverently bowed and said,
Earl Nast, something abnormal has happened with the hunt.
On the Black Emperor, King of the Five Seas Nast continued having himself addressed as an earl, as it was a title conferred upon him by Emperor Roselle. Of course, he had publicly announced that it was a matter of time before he established a pirate's kingdom, becoming a duke, king, or even an emperor. After a brief silence, a solemn voice sounded from the captain's cabin.
Circle around it. By your will.
Bird Mustang didn't ask why, as he directly accepted the order. Of course, he could imagine the reason. Be it an illusion or not, to make such a huge steam and sail hybrid liner vanish from the scrutiny of hundreds of pirates, it was definitely not something a low or mid-sequence beyonder could accomplish. The ship definitely had a demigod or a powerhouse wielding a demigod-level sealed artifact. And to clash with an unknown demigod for an ordinary liner was definitely an irrational act. Even if the Earl of White Maple Nast, as the King of the Five Seas, he wouldn't do such rash acts unless there was something worth fighting for. From this angle, the demigod was only hiding on the liner and had not launched any counterattack. This also implied that he didn't wish to clash with the Black Emperor and the King of the Five Seas. Therefore, he had only exhibited his existence for shock and awe purposes. Bird Mustang immediately got the sailors to leave the broadside and turn the Black Emperor around. At this point, a huge and heavy red-headed sea eagle suddenly flew out of its flock and headed for the Black Emperor, spiraling above the ghost ship. Amidst the pirates' confusion, the red-headed sea eagle looked down upon the deck and spoke deeply in a human's voice.
I wish to meet the Earl of White Maple.
Bird Mustang was taken aback for a second before he cast his eyes at the cabin. King of the Five Seas Nast's solemn voice sounded again. Instead of directly answering the sea eagle, he instructed his subordinates,
Let him in.
Bird Mustang immediately followed the order as the sea eagle swooped down in the storm. Its body gradually changed and turned into a humanoid form. When it landed on the deck, it was no longer a red-headed sea eagle, but a man with a tall top hat and tuxedo. His face wore a feathered mask. Bird Mustang's eyes dilated slightly, as though he was trying to take in the figure clearer. But no matter how much he observed it, he was unable to discover anything abnormal about this exaggerated man. It was as though there wasn't a red-headed sea eagle from the very beginning. A few seconds later, Bird Mustang's pupils dilated even more because he saw the figure's side profile when it walked past him. This man, who appeared like he was an invitee at a banquet, was very thin. His side profile was about the width of 2 fingers. At that instant, Bird Mustang felt as though he was seeing a walking paper figurine, but it was also slightly thicker than one, a monster. He gulped with great difficulty as he watched the terrifying demigod walk towards the cabin. The pirates on deck quickly retreated and leaned against the shipboard as though a nightmare had just walked past them. To them, this abnormally proportioned man was something they had never seen before. It was more harrowing than the many monsters they had seen in the past. At the 3rd story of the cabin, outside the captain's cabin, Klein held the handle, twisted it, and opened the door. The reason he had made himself appear so strange was partially due to having no choice, but it was also partially deliberate. The former was because the red-headed sea eagle wasn't big enough, so after creating the clothes and mask, there was no way to create a normal human's body, even without the innards. The deliberate choice was because he was beginning to try out his theories on acting as a bizarro sorcerer. He had some ideas regarding this. The term sorcerer wasn't key. What was key was to use the methods of a sorcerer to appear bizarre. With a light creak, the dark black door opened, revealing the interior of the captain's cabin. Candle lamps drooped down from above, with 41 on the left and 40 on the right in an asymmetrical manner. At the end of it, a black platform rose up, surrounding an iron-black chair. King of the Five Seas Nast's figure was relatively normal. He was slightly taller than 1.9 meters, unlike the non-human form, which resembled a giant that Klein had previously encountered. He was still wearing a miniaturized crown with a black robe with silver ends. He had a squarish face with slight wrinkles. He had a short black mustache underneath his chin and his black eyes swirled with a red glow. It made one bow their heads without realizing it. Hey, Nast said in a deep voice.
I've never met you before, Mr. Bizarro Sorcerer.
Klein took off his hat and bowed.
You know me now.
Nast made his voice, which made spirit bodies tremble, resound inside the captain's cabin.
Speak. Why are you visiting me?
Klein replied, without being affected.
Emperor, I wish to know of your impression of Emperor Roselle. Everyone knows that you and your father have met him in the past far more than once.
Nast swept the paper figurine like demigod as his dark red light brightened significantly.
Have a seat first.
Before he finished his sentence, Klein felt a potent suppressive force on him. His body involuntarily sat on a chair beside him. However, he was only here as a marionette. With a flick of the spirit body threads, the figure that was thin as a book had quickly restored its balance. Chapter 972, Nast's Memories. With the pressure relieved, Klein casually pulled a chair over and placed it by the door, sitting opposite King of the Five Seas Nast with the entire hall separating them. Although the Pirate King was more than 1.9 meters tall and was sitting on a black platform, allowing him to look down in a domineering manner, Klein didn't play second fiddle in this encounter. He wore his tall top hat again. After a brief silence, Nast, who had the official title of Earl of White Maple, said with a solemn tone,
Give me a reason why I should answer your question.
Klein's thin body casually leaned back as he said,
You will not need to hear the same request when you have something you need to trade with me in the future.
The dark red light flickered in Nast's black eyes as he said,
I basically know all the saints active in this world, but that doesn't include you.
Klein caressed the feathered mask on his face and laughed. Without answering, he asked in return,
Have you met Zeratul?
I've met him twice in Emperor Roselle's palace. I'd also interacted with quite a number of Secret Order members.
Nast replied with a calm and direct but extremely domineering tone.
Quite a number of Secret Order members. You should introduce me to them when the opportunity arises.
Klein couldn't help but quip. Khan. He then smiled and said,
I've also met Zeratul.
Nast raised his hand to stroke his short black beard. His already tall figure seemed to burgeon, making the mood in the captain's cabin even gloomier and repressed. After a few seconds, he stared at Klein from above and said,
My impression of Emperor Roselle is very simple. No one is more suitable than him to be the Black Emperor.
He didn't explain what Black Emperor meant or pointed to, ignoring if the demigod opposite him understood or not.
Is that so? From this King of the Five Seas' words, although the Emperor's diary implied that he made up his mind only in his later years to switch to the Black Emperor pathway and make preparations, he had long had such inclinations. He had unconsciously exhibited it and set up the situation ahead of time.
Klein thought in enlightenment. He believed that Nast's impression of Emperor Roselle was limited to that. After all, they had only met a few times. Hence, he switched topics.
In the Emperor's later years, did he get you or your father to do something secret?
Nast's crown shook a little as he replied.
Someone had once asked me the same question.
Klein laughed and asked with a bold guess.
Bernadette?
Yes.
Nast held the two sides of his black throne with his hands.
Back then, she was very young and immature to ask such a question. With Emperor Roselle's level in his later years, compared to handing something secret to me and my father, what could be kept more secret than doing it himself?
This is implying that I am as immature as Bernadette back then.
Klein sighed and said,
To people who are concerned about this, one wouldn't abandon even the slightest sliver of hope.
This was also why he wished to meet the King of the Five Seas after concealing the liner. He was now trying to find clues to the door of light above the gray fog in the real world. Apart from confirming who the third transmigrator was, he had to delve deep into Emperor Roselle's matters. This was a necessary decision. The dark red glow in Nast's eyes contracted and expanded.
What's your relationship with Emperor Roselle?
Klein thought and said with a sigh,
We can be considered old friends.
After all, they had been above that mysterious door of light, and the cocoons they were in were neighbors with only a thin obstacle in between them. They had been hanging there for centuries or even millennia. This was a connection that stemmed from reality, and psychologically, having read so many of the Emperor's diaries, Klein had long treated the Emperor as a fellow countryman. He shared the same feelings for home and sense of identity with him. Nast stared at the thin demigod who sat by the door before he retracted his gaze and solemnly said,
Any more questions?
Klein was already prepared. He asked in an unhurried tone,
Do you feel that there was anything abnormal about Emperor Roselle in his later years?
The slightly wrinkled Nast remained silent for quite a while before saying,
I don't know enough about him, so I wasn't able to notice anything abnormal. The only thing that made me feel odd was that when me and my father met him, he would stand at a floor-to-ceiling window facing west. He would stare into the distance. This would happen in the morning, noon, and the evening, and that room wasn't the only one with a floor-to-ceiling window.
West. Into the distance. The fog sea?
Klein seemed to mutter to himself as though seeking confirmation. He recalled that the Emperor's diary had mentioned of a mysterious primitive island, and he recalled the abyss that hid somewhere in the fog sea. Nast nodded slightly and said,
That was my guess as well.
Phew.
Klein silently exhaled. After some consideration, he stood up and said,
I'm done with my questions. Please pardon me for my intrusion. Your Lordship, I wonder if I can help you in a transaction.
He was fulfilling his promise. Monofila 2 seconds and said Bachahaya.
Help me find the card of blasphemy that corresponds to the Black Emperor.
For an instant, Klein suspected that the Pirate King was testing him, but he immediately felt that an unknown demigod had little to do with the Black Emperor card. He said with a smile,
I'll try my best. However, the questions from before aren't worth a card of blasphemy. If I can obtain it, I'll trade you for the information inside it. Of course, I might only provide clues to that card.
Nast caressed the armrest of his iron-black throne and said in a deadpan manner,
So be it.
Klein took off his hat again, bowed, and turned to leave before returning to the deck. Under Horror Viscount Bird Mustang and Company's gaze, he raised his arms. His body rapidly contracted as the feather mask on his face spread out. In just 2 or 3 seconds, his entire person became an ordinary red-headed sea eagle. This sea eagle immediately flapped its wings, flying into the dark storm, vanishing from the sights of the pirates of the Black Emperor.
That's a demigod.
Bird Mustang looked into mid-air and sighed. Although making a further advancement at Sequence 5 increased the inclination towards madness and a loss of control, making it highly possible for Beyonders to fail their advancement, the title of being a demigod remained attractive. As long as one successfully took the step, they could attain godhood, allowing their life to undergo a fundamental change. Be it in terms of lifespan or powers, it far exceeded that of humans, allowing them to reign above all. On the liner, Klein abandoned his control over the red-headed sea eagle, allowing it to plunge into the sea to be fish food without anyone seeing it. And at this moment, the passengers on board felt high-strung because the Black Emperor was about to approach. In fact, this should have happened a few minutes ago, but for some reason, the Black Emperor had ignored the liner and headed forward. Yet the liner didn't use this opportunity to escape, and it had instead circled around the Black Emperor, maintaining a few hundred meters from it. This bizarre situation continued for a while before it finally ended, leaving dozens of meters between the two ships. The Black Emperor passed the liner and steered into the stormy night without returning. The passengers and crew watched blankly and realized the reality of the situation only a few minutes later. The Black Emperor was gone. It hadn't attempted to plunder them. A number of passengers cheered while others had tears stream down their faces. A few collapsed to the ground and relaxed. Only a few maintained their lucidity, feeling puzzled as to everything that had happened. However, they were unable to find an answer that agreed with the situation at hand. All they could do was console themselves. The Black Emperor must have completed a plunder already. Since this is a liner and not a cargo ship, it didn't catch its eye. As the euphoria spread across the ship, Klein, donning the appearance of Dwayne Dantes, cast his gaze to the north. Compared to King of the Five Seas Nast, who had only met Roselle a few times, there was another person who knew the Emperor even better, Queen Mystic Bernadette. Being an equal peer to Nast, she had recently been in Backland.
After I return to Backland, I'll get Admiral of Stars to contact Queen Mystic and try to meet her as soon as possible.
Klein retracted his gaze, drew the curtains, and went to bed, in the Rorstead Archipelago waters on the future. Admiral of Stars Catalea finally received a letter from Queen Mystic Bernadette. She had no idea when the invisible messenger arrived, but this didn't stop her from effusing her joy. Tearing open the envelope and spreading open the letter, Catalea eagerly read the first line below the salutation.
That's indeed Ciel's descendant, Mederai. That artisan is really Emperor Roselle's direct descendant. I can't allow him to mix with the believers of the primordial moon. I have to bring him on board the future.
As Catalea thought, she nodded indiscernibly. After making up her mind, she thought of Artisan Ciel's character and morals that only spelled trouble. She felt that she had the responsibility and duty to discipline him. Amidst her deliberation, she walked to the window of the captain's cabin and cast her gaze outside. After some searching, her gaze fell onto the shipboard where Frank Lee was munching on mushrooms. Catalea shouted out with her normal tone.
Frank.
Frank, who had his sleeves rolled up, snapped out of his deep thought.
Captain, is there something?
Catalea said seriously.
I'll get you an assistant for your experiments.
Frank was taken aback before he revealed a pure smile.
All right.
Chapter 973, New Angel. Upon seeing Frank's smile, Catalea had mixed feelings. She then retracted her gaze and turned it to the nearby fishing village where the future was docked. No one expected this place to be an important base of the Moses Ascetic Order. To avoid the pursuit of the Aurora Order, Catalea and her crew had been docked here recently. She wasn't in a rush to set sail but was prepared to go ashore. She planned on using the equipment in the fishing village to make contact with her subordinates who were monitoring Artisan Ciel in Bayam. Through that, she could confirm the situation and make plans. Only with this in place could the future set sail again, headed for the capital of the Rorstead Archipelago, Bayam, that was several days away. In Backland, the sky brightened especially early in July, but the overall temperature wasn't considered hot. It didn't even exceed 30 degrees Celsius. Emlyn wore a top hat to shelter him from the sunlight that penetrated the clouds as he disembarked a carriage and walked into the Harvest Church. Looking over, he saw the mountain like Father Yutravsky, who wore a brown priest robe and a clergyman's bonnet. He was standing in front of the sacred emblem of life, preaching to the few believers that came to pray in the morning. Emlyn didn't take a second look as he walked straight to the back of the cathedral. He arrived in a room that he called his, and he familiarly changed into his priest robes. As he wiped the candle stands, he waited for the believers to leave. About 20 minutes later, he finally found an opportunity to sit beside Bishop Yutravsky and muttered to himself while looking at the sacred emblem of life.
Father, I have a question I would like to consult you about.
The thin-browed, light blue-eyed Bishop Yutravsky with some clear wrinkles replied with a smile.
Go ahead.
Emlyn held his breath and verbalized the words he had been thinking over the entire night.
If, and I'm saying if there's a distant relative who fools you, making you and your friend fall into danger and almost lose your life, and this matter isn't suitable in court, how would you punish him?
Despite sitting down, Yutravsky remained like a hill. He said in a deep but gentle voice,
First, you have to confirm if the relative had made a mistake due to negligence, or if he had deliberately fooled you and lead you into a trap. If it's the former, you need to warn him, remind him, and teach him, instead of thinking of punishing him. If it's the latter, you still need to confirm if this is the way he usually does things. If it is, then you need to eliminate him. Otherwise, he will definitely bring more harm to others, bringing harm to innocents. By ending his life and sending him back to the land, it will restart the cycle of life. It's a type of compassion and a type of purification.
Elimination. Father speaks of murder in a way that's more natural, mellow, and calmer than the world.
Emlyn's facial muscles twitched as he hurriedly interrupted Utrovsky's reply.
No, he usually doesn't act this way. It's just that, due to various reasons, he had targeted me this once. I don't wish to kill him because of this.
Just as he said that, Emlyn froze. He had apparently, probably, most likely, just expressed the fact that he was the victim, expressing that this matter was a sanguine internal matter. Utrovsky turned to look at him and revealed a smile.
Not bad? You already understand how precious life is?
Emlyn forced a smile.
Then, how should he be punished?
Utrovsky looked at the sacred emblem of life in front of him.
I do not advocate appealing to violence. You can bring him here and have him listen to my preaching and reading the Bible. He will understand the value of life and experience the compassion of Earth Mother. He will serve to redeem his sins.
Isn't this what I experienced?
Emlyn was taken aback before realizing that this method was in line with his intentions. This neither caused Aaron's Boyar's death, nor was it comparable to simply beating him up and demanding compensation. More importantly, this wouldn't escalate to a conflict that would cause strife among the sanguine. Of course, every method had its flaws. To Emlyn, the biggest problem was, how was he to bring Ernest Boyar to the Harvest Church? From the moment he began doing volunteer work here, all the sanguine in Backlund knew to avoid this region. Ernest Boyar was no exception. It was impossible to trick him into coming in. And if he resorted to violence, Emlyn believed that, with the ring bestowed to him by Ancestor Lilith, as well as Miss Magician's powerful spellbook that could be rented, defeating Ernest Boyar wasn't a difficult endeavor. However, to control him wasn't simple. After all, he was a sanguine viscount, equivalent to that of a Sequence 5 Beyonder. In addition, although Ernest Boyar wasn't too old, he had quite a collection. Under such circumstances, the extent of which to directly taking action was hard to gauge. It could easily lead to death, and Emlyn would be blamed for it.
Perhaps I need some help. In Backlund, there are many members of the Tarot Club. If we work together, we should be able to easily control Ernest. I can't expose my identity because of this. The cooperation should be done in stages, so that we don't have to meet.
Amidst his thoughts, Emlyn had made his decision. He planned on assigning a mission during the tarot gathering next week in search for help. He nodded gently in response to Father Utrovsky's suggestion.
It sounds pretty good. I plan on making a decision a few days later after calming down.
Father Utrovsky nodded and smiled.
Fruits are obtained from planting them. It's a long process that requires patience. From the looks of it, you have understood this point.
Of course, it's such a simple principle.
Emlyn raised his chin slightly as he habitually clasped his hands and prayed to the sacred emblem of life. 22 Phelps Street, Lowen Charity Bursary Foundation. Audrey placed a document in hand on the table and looked up at the wall clock in the director's office. She could hardly relax. She had already made an appointment with Escalante to head over to Stephen Hampress's residence in the afternoon. Clearly, this meant a test. If the Psychology Alchemists team was careful enough, they would have already reported the news, and there might be a counselor secretly observing everything. Based on her current level and abilities, although Audrey was unable to determine how terrifying a high-sequence spectator was, she could imagine the kinds of performance they had in certain domains. This made her uncontrollably nervous, afraid that she would be seen through.
In fact, I should have delayed it a little more. Although the time and the emotions I showed are in line with logic and psychology, delaying a meeting would definitely incur suspicion. But compared to a little bit of suspicion, it's more important to wait for Mr. World to return from the southern continent. That way, I can directly arrange for them to meet at the Foundation. I don't have to worry about a high-sequence spectator discovering anything. Sigh, Audrey. Your plans weren't well thought enough.
Audrey sighed silently and cast placate on herself to calm her emotions. After the afternoon, she wasn't in a rush to leave the Lowen Charity Bursary Foundation. Sitting inside her office, she bowed her head, clasped her hands together, and softly prayed to Mr. Fool. After completing this, she got onto her carriage with Annie and Susie, heading for the residence of the furniture merchant, Stephen Hampreys. Just as the carriage began moving, Audrey suddenly saw a gorgeous beam of light appear. Amidst the beam of light, a 12-winged angel bathed with golden light descended. The wings, which were made of flames, had wrapped her in layers before they dissipated, layer after layer. Audrey's vision quickly recovered as she swept her gaze past Annie and Susie through the corner of her eye in an unnoticeable manner. She realized that they hadn't noticed anything that had happened.
It's a little different from the previous angel. With Mr. Fool's greater reawakening, his angels have also recovered further.
As the corners of her lips quivered, Audrey wiped the smile from her face, her inner heart becoming abnormally firm. In less than half an hour, her carriage had stopped by Stephen Hampreys' door. After passing her hand to Annie, Audrey was helped down the carriage, and she walked straight to the door. She watched as her attendant pulled the doorbell. Before long, Escalante came to open the door. Like before, she directly brought Audrey to the activity room on the first floor. Annie and Susie were brought to the living room by the servants. Upon arriving at the activity room, Escalante reached out to hold the doorknob as she gestured for Audrey to enter.
This.
Audrey had a guess, but she didn't show it. She slowly walked through the door which Escalante had opened. Escalante didn't enter as she closed the activity room's door. Audrey looked ahead and saw that on a single seater facing the activity room's door, there was an elder sitting there quietly. The elder wore a shirt, vest, and a jacket, matched with blue-gray trousers with lines adorning it, as well as a dark red bow tie. His hair was completely white but remained thick and lush. He had a warm and elegant bearing. He had a pair of blue eyes that seemed to hide wisdom and knowledge. Apart from the wrinkles on his forehead, he didn't have any wrinkles elsewhere. Audrey knew him. He was the royal family's consultant, Klein Moretti. Of course, Audrey had long known of this old gentleman's secret identity from the Tarot Club, a counselor of the psychology alchemists. She didn't disguise her surprise because she truly was surprised. Although she had guessed at the possibility of Klein Moretti's appearance, she never expected him to appear directly. She imagined that he would observe her in secret, allowing Hilbert and Stephen to speak on his behalf.
You're very surprised?
He then stood up and bowed.
A pleasure meeting you, Miss Audrey.
Audrey deliberately opened her mouth before closing it again. Following that, she replied with a mixed smile.
I'm not sure how I should address you.
Klein Moretti chuckled.
Like always.
He pointed to the sofa beside them.
Let's have a seat.
Audrey took a deep breath, wore a smile, and unhurriedly walked over. Sitting by the sofa, she maintained an adequate distance from him. Chapter 974, Mind World. Klein Moretti picked up the porcelain teacup and took a sip. Looking at Audrey, who sat in a flawless posture, he said genially,
There's no need to act so reserved. This isn't our first meeting. I still recall discussing Biermann's philosophy of ethics and Kongsoka's pragmatism with you 2 years ago.
Audrey smiled faintly and said,
I just find it difficult to put the idea of you and a psychology alchemist counselor together.
Klein Moretti hadn't introduced himself, but it was a reasonable inference based on Audrey's knowledge of the psychology alchemists and the present situation. Klein crossed his right leg and said with a smile,
This isn't something worth paying attention to. Never forget that our Psychology Alchemists is an organization established with the goal of studying the psyche and to build knowledge. We are more about the academic side of things rather than handling matters. Since it's academic, you can always treat a counselor as a university's professor.
If she hadn't learned from Mr. World that Klein Moretti was behind Quarren's suicide, Audrey would have been able to conclude that he was a knowledgeable, amiable, humorous, and humble scholar, regardless of the amount of observation that she did. However, since she was wary, Audrey wasn't someone who would so easily believe things that appeared on the surface. As she looked at him and organized her words, she prevented herself from focusing too much on one point. She kept her thoughts lively and scattered to prevent herself from being hypnotized. At this moment, her mind suddenly turned adrift. She seemed to see the 7 pure lights that contained infinite knowledge and the dense, indescribable figures. She saw them blanketing everything from high above. This was the spirituality sky, the reflection of the spirituality in one's mind, and beneath the spirituality sky was a deep, dark sea. Every drop of water resembled a point of light, as though they represented an imprint on each subconscious. Near this sea were several islands. One of them belonged to Audrey. She clearly knew that this was a manifestation of her consciousness. What was exposed above the sea was what she could detect, and the parts covered by the seawater were her deeper consciousness that she was usually unable to grasp or know. Floating above the island, Audrey looked to the bottom. She first noticed that the area was a solitary, quiet gray blur. They screened out her vision, making her only capable of seeing the massive and dark black outlines of the subconscious, as well as the illusory and rippling sea of collective subconscious. She was unable to obtain much information from that. Audrey was puzzled as to how she had entered this strange state when she saw large swaths of gray split apart, like the sea deep in the sea of subconscious at the island below. It revealed a stone platform that had appeared at some point in time. On the platform, a figure grew up rapidly in a fashion akin to blinking, entering Audrey's field of view almost instantly. His hair was completely white, but remained thick and lush. He wore a standard 3-piece suit, matched with blue-gray trousers with lines adorning it, as well as a dark red bow tie. This man with deep wrinkles on his forehead was none other than Klein Moretti. Compared to the Klein sitting on the sofa, he appeared more sinister. He didn't wear a smile, and his head was slightly bowed. It was as though he was observing Audrey's subconscious that lay behind. In a few steps, he walked into Audrey's island of consciousness through the sea of collective subconscious. Then, he went from the subconscious to the area exposed above the sea like a silent visitor who didn't knock on the door or receive any permission. After arriving on the island, Klein Moretti raised his head. His facial skin was already covered in grayish-white scales. His irises were gold and vertical, and it didn't show any hint of emotion. Floating in midair, Audrey observed this scene and fully understood the situation she was in. This was the world of the mind, a mind world formed by the spirituality sky, sea of collective subconscious, and the island of consciousness.
Due to the blessings from Mr. Fool's angel, Klein Moretti's intrusion of my body of heart and mind and psyche through the sea of collective subconscious sounded alarms. That force has separated my most fundamental part of my self-conscious, allowing me to control everything on the island from the spirituality sky. Thus, I'm able to truly resist true forms of telepathy. How magical. No, how despicable of Klein Moretti. He's not polite at all. He intruded into my house without gaining any permission or providing any notification.
Audrey grumbled in midair. After understanding her current situation, she secretly controlled the changes that were influencing the island, while answering the casually seated Klein Moretti in the real world.
I'm also very reserved when facing university professors.
As she spoke, Audrey made her inner island mumble.
This isn't a good analogy. As a elderly psychology alchemist counselor, he should be a sequence 4 at least. This is a demigod, one that naturally makes one feel fear, awe, and reserved.
On the sofa, Klein Moretti chuckled immediately.
Then I won't be forcing you. I've heard about you from Hilbert. I heard that you've advanced from psychiatrist to hypnotist in a short few months. I'm very curious about how you did it. Oh, I've also heard of the answer you gave Escalante. Having the courage to make use of matters. However, I wish to hear something more detailed.
At this moment, the Klein Moretti on Audrey's mind island was observing his surroundings with a deadpan expression, listening the resonating voice. Audrey was already prepared for this as she deliberately pretended to be organizing her words. After a few seconds, she said,
It's just the superficial meaning of having courage to make use of matter. Sa. Let's put it this way. In my future plans, I've always had one of my options being a psychiatrist. Since I've acquired the corresponding Beyonder powers, I was definitely very happy to try it out and help the people around me resolve their mental and psychological problems.
While saying that, she showed some signs of embarrassment towards such actions that bordered on childishness. Her mind island faithfully reflected this. After a pause, Audrey continued.
During this process, I discovered that my control over the potion's powers became better until, one day, I felt something in me shatter and fuse into my blood. It also allowed me to vaguely see illusory stars. Mr. Rambus, what does it represent? For some reason, I firmly decided to become a hypnotist from that day. This might also be a cue from my subconscious.
After saying that, Audrey deliberately stuck out her tongue on her mind island like when she was little, doing things she usually wouldn't do. It was a way to prove that she was feeling a little embarrassed, because playing psychiatrist was no different from playing princess when she was little. And embarrassment often meant the truth. Klein Moretti nodded gently and said,
Very talented. You seem to have figured out the acting method by yourself.
Acting method Audrey wore a surprised and blank look both inside and outside before coming to a realization. Klein Moretti said with a genial smile,
It's exactly as you think it is. By acting based on the potion's name and concluding the corresponding principles, that will speed up the digestion of the potion. It is an effective method for reducing the negative influences. However, before Sequence 6 we do not teach it, because we do not advocate members using this method to accelerate the digestion of their potions. Surprisingly, you have figured it out yourself.
Audrey asked sincerely out of curiosity.
Why don't you advocate it?
Klein Moretti sighed and said,
This will make the members not be themselves. Some might even be assimilated by the remnants of the potion. To put it simply, the first 3 sequences are for one to slowly grasp their powers and get used to being extraordinary. It allows one's subconscious to be deeper, become clearer, and turn more mature. It aids in resisting the subsequent problems that come from the acting method. Of course, I can only give my opinion on the spectator pathway. As for the other Beyonder pathways, I'm not too sure if they're the same. But clearly pathways that focus on the domain of the mind would have some differences in the area of self-consciousness.
Audrey was unable to determine the veracity of Klein Moretti's words. She felt that there was definitely some reason to it, but it was not entirely the truth.
Little Sun mentioned before that one key thing to remember regarding the acting method is remember that you're only acting. I find this more appropriate. Yes, I've been strictly abiding to it, and will keep doing so in the future. Audrey, you mustn't be careless. From this moment forth, you must put more emphasis on your self-consciousness. From Mr. Fool's point of view, this must be trivial, and doesn't require additional emphasis since it's included in the statement of only acting. But to the ordinary person, perhaps it's relatively more important.
As Audrey's thoughts raced, she asked,
Can you explain the acting method in more detail?
Klein Moretti explained it to her in a relatively more detailed manner before saying,
You are indeed talented and qualified to obtain the Sequence 5 Dreamwalker Potion formula, but before that, I'll give you several missions. This is out of fairness and also a form of training for you. This is because once you achieve Sequence 5, you'll be leading 2 to 3 psychological discussion groups. Your every judgment and choice will influence the future and even the lives of the members beneath you. Therefore, we mustn't allow people who deeply lack experience in handling matters to advance to Sequence 5.
Audrey didn't object to it.
Understandable. What's the first mission?
Klein Moretti said with a smile.
A simple but rather long-term mission. Every piece of feedback you provide will count towards your contributions.
At this point, he sighed.
The fracture between the new party and the Conservative Party is widening. The more conflict there is, the more divided the kingdom's internal politics will be. I wish that you can take note of the attitude of your father, Earl Hall. Inform me of some of his views towards various bills and matters. Don't worry, this will not cause him any harm. We only wish to mend the fractures.
His final statement was, in fact, not supported by logic. It was solely a promise. But with Kvin Rambis raising his right hand to his temples while on Audrey's Mind Island, Audrey felt that what he said was very reasonable and deeply relatable. Floating above her mind world, she immediately snapped to her senses and realized something was amiss. Chapter 975. A Familiar Feeling.
How can you not cause harm to my father from knowing his trump cards? This will bring about negative impacts to matters that he's trying to push for or object to.
Floating in the mind world, Audrey looked down at her island of consciousness. Her thoughts were so calm that it surprised her. Right on the heels of that, she suddenly realized why friend Rambis had directed Quaron's suicide. Audrey had always been concerned about this matter. Furthermore, she had obtained information from various sources giving her a rather clear idea of the overall picture. However, she had ultimately been stumped about the mastermind's goal. This trap seemed to be targeted at the purse strings of the Conservative Party, Baron Sindris. As long as he failed to respond properly, this powerful banker would have his problems exposed and end up handled by the official Beyonder organizations. However, the actual process seemed to lack the panache of a high-sequence Beyonder of the Spectator pathway. It was especially so when Dwayne Dantes reacted unexpectedly, causing the plan to immediately be foiled. Yet, there wasn't any mending of the plan. As a rather senior spectator, Audrey had long noticed the incongruity within this matter. However, it was only after hearing Kvin Rambis's words today that she realized the core of the matter. Kvin Rambis didn't care if he had successfully taken down Baron Sindris, as he had already accomplished his goals. It was just as he had said. The new party and Conservative Party were fractured. Although Kvin Rambis claimed to be trying to mend it, his true goal was to deepen the cracks and cause them to completely fall out with each other.
Why is he doing this?
Audrey controlled her mind island and didn't make it show any puzzled emotions. She then replied to Kvin Rambis,
I can understand your concern for the kingdom's political situation. I will work hard on this.
Just as she said that, the gloomy Kvin Rambis on the Mind Island lowered his right hand from his forehead. Kvin Rambis, who was sitting on a sofa in the real world, said with a gladdened smile,
You are indeed a young noble lady, filled with compassion.
With that said, the old gentleman lowered his right leg, which was covered by grayish-blue trousers with lined patterns. He leaned forward slightly as his eyes grew darker.
Due to your identity and daily environment, you shall forget about me. You will only remember Hilbert, Stephen, and Escalante. You will pass any information through them. When there are extremely pressing issues that need reporting, you will subconsciously visit me with the excuse of consulting me on some academic question. When you enter my room, your lost memories will recover.
As Kvin Rambis said those words, the him on Audrey's Mind Island opened his mouth and repeated the words. A rock took form and quickly plunged into the ground, sinking into the subconscious. At that moment, Audrey felt as though she had dissociated into two entities. One was a result of a mind island. She could no longer remember the appearance or name of the elder in front of her. She only knew that she had come to Stephen Hampress' residence and met a psychology alchemist's counselor, where she received the approbation of the acting method and received a new mission. Another her floated beneath the spirituality sky, acutely aware of everything that had happened. However, there wasn't much emotional changes. It was more optimistic than gloomy. Audrey was certain that the one in midair was her true self-conscious. Therefore, she didn't feel confounded. With her as the true self, she controlled her other self and got up in a muddle.
Yes, sir.
After answering him, she rapidly straightened her body, and like a puppet who was being controlled by invisible strings, she walked to the door and left. At the instant she closed the door, the her in the mind world sky and the her corresponding to the island of consciousness fused as one. There were no longer any differences. The two entities, with certain memory discrepancies, instantly fused together, giving Audrey a few seconds of confusion. However, with plenty of experience in treating people and hypnotizing others, she very quickly and skillfully identified the differences. She then reconstructed every detail from before.
What powerful mind reading and hypnosis! He directly entered my body of heart and mind, and even my soul body, to exert influence via the sea of collective subconscious.
Although Audrey had the blessings of the fool's angel, she felt that her recollections were like viewing old photographs. They were yellowed and faded, as though they were matters that happened years ago.
I'll be able to do the same in the future. The blessings of Mr. Fool's angel is really impressive. Humph, I'll only inform you of Father's take on unimportant matters.
As Audrey's mind whirled, her mood turned for the better. Whoosh! The steam locomotive that spewed out copious amounts of smoke dragged its carriages as it chugged into Backland. After traveling for days, Klein had finally returned to this capital of capitals. As Duane Dantes, Klein wore a top hat and a formal suit while holding a gold-inlaid cane. He slowly left the first-class cabin and firmly stood on the platform. Behind him was a man with mixed blood. He was about 1.75 meters tall, and he carried 2 luggage bags. He was none other than the marionette Enzo. Of course, this winner had already changed his name to Anuni, which sounded more in line with the Southern Continent's traditions. In the future, he would be the go-to person to establish contact with the Southern Continent's clientele for the upstart tycoon and arms dealer Duane Dantes. The non-crucial business would be handled by him, without needing Duane Dantes to personally head to East and West Balaam. Of course, this was simply a disguise. In fact, Klein would be the one making the trip. He had decided to send believers to West Balaam in the name of sea god Kalvetua, and get them to represent himself to complete some small-scale deals. After all, Danitz was an infamous pirate over the 5 seas, with a bounty exceeding 10,000 pounds. Furthermore, he had close ties with Gehrman Sparrow, and it easily incurred suspicion if he kept helping Duane Dantes. After leaving the station, Klein rode a carriage and returned to 160 Balkland Street. It was already dark by then. The street lamps on both sides of the street had already lit up, likewise for Duane Dantes's residence. Butler Walter and housekeeper Taneja led the male and female servants, as well as the gardener and coachman, out. They stood on both sides to welcome their employer back. After he arrived in Desi Bay and bought the train tickets, Klein had sent a telegram back to Backland, informing his butler when he was returning. However, he had instructed him not to send the coachman to pick him up at the station. After all, this was an era when steam locomotives were often delayed. It wasn't impossible that its arrival would be delayed to the next morning. Glancing at his servants, who stood with a standard reverent pose, Klein secretly nodded and passed through them as he sighed inwardly.
This does resemble the style of nobility. Even when the employer isn't around, the butler doesn't skive.
When he arrived at the door, he nodded gently at Walter and Tanea before saying,
"It must have been hard on you while I was away."
It's our duty,
Walter and Tanea said with a bow. Klein then turned his gaze to his valet, Richardson. He realized that this good-looking mixed blood had a somewhat pale expression as he kept stealing glances at his employer's new valet, Anuni. Klein smirked inwardly as he nodded at him.
You did well. However, there's some business involving the Southern Continent that requires Inuni to handle it. Oh yes, be Mr. Walter's assistant and help him in gathering information for a manor outside the city.
Assistant. Assistant butler.
Richardson was first taken aback before he replied, in pleasant surprise.
Yes, sir.
With this role, it meant that he had broken free from the constraints of being a valet. He had been promoted. Walter didn't ask about the manor in detail, as he seriously arranged for his employer's settling in, bath, and meals. After all of this was done, he and Anuni, male, sent Duane Dantes back to the 3-story before he asked,
Sir, do you plan on buying a manor in the suburbs of Backland? What requirements do you have?
Something not too expensive. Who knows how long I can use this identity for?
Klein inwardly gave a self-deprecating comment before deliberating.
One with a vineyard and brewery?
After completing the arms deal, he had already established himself in Backland's high society and had earned a huge sum of money. Therefore, it was necessary for him to own a manor. He couldn't afford to not be capable of inviting his friends on a vacation and hunt in the suburbs when autumn and winter came. This was a faux pas that could easily make him be viewed with scorn. Furthermore, the manors in Backland's suburbs were rather expensive. One could purchase a huge manor with rubber trees in places like Desi Bay for £8,000 to £10,000, but here, all he wanted was a vineyard and grain farm, with facilities like a brewery.
I will gather the information as soon as possible,
Walter replied respectfully. He knew his employer was exhausted from his traveling, so after briefly informing him of the recent developments, he left the three-story and busied himself on other matters. With the new valet's help, Klein changed his clothes and washed up. During this process, Klein, who had gotten accustomed to his godhood, couldn't help but lampoon.
If it wasn't because a marionette cannot be more than 1,000 meters from me, would I have changed valets? Despite being a tycoon, I still have to serve myself. Sigh.
Amidst his sighs, he dismissed Winner and Uni, male, to the adjoining room and walked to the window. He looked at the lamplit backland, which resembled stars, as he allowed his thoughts to wander.
Next, my goal is MI9's Deputy Director, Brigadier General Quantus Kilgore. As for the Captain of the Royal Guards, Viscount Stratford, I can leave him to the demoness Trissy. She has vanished for quite some time. I wonder what he has been busy with. I wonder if she has come up with a way to approach that Viscount. I had previously informed her that I have other matters to tend to and wasn't free via the method she gave me. I'll later have to confirm that I'm free now and can continue our previous cooperation effort.
After a while, Klein reined in his thoughts and got into bed. Without the help of cogitation, he fell deep asleep. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly opened his eyes and sensed that someone had entered 160 Boakland Street.
Here it comes again.
Klein couldn't help but raise his hand to rub his temples. On the first day of returning to Backland, he had been awakened in the middle of the night.